Hello. It might now be summer, but I think it's time I did my spring reading wrap up. And there isn't a whole lot. I was like, oh God, this is gonna be a very, very long video, but I actually didn't read that much this spring, but there was a couple of books that were incredible. So I'm excited to talk about them and recommend them. And then there was a couple where there were some disappointments along the way. I think the last wrap up I did was for February, so this would be starting in March. The first book I read in March was Weird Fucks by Lynn Tillman. The cover, we love the cover. This book was so quick to read. It's like little episodic vignettes that are revealing, honest, quite brutally honest. They're about encounters with sex. They're very much about who she is having sex with and how that is affecting her, and the relationship between her sexual partner and herself, and the revelations that she learns of herself through sex. And it was a really quick read. It didn't blow me away. I didn't think it was anything really exciting and different, but it was like, there was good writing. If you're a woman who sleeps with men, then you'll probably resonate with a lot of the things that happen in this. I would recommend getting it just because the cover is so gorgeous. But yeah, that was the first book that started off my spring reading. Next up, I don't have all of the books here because either I have let other people borrow my books or I've just simply left them somewhere. So the next one I actually listened to as an audiobook, Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency by Olivia Laing. This was like my dream non-fiction book. It was essays about artists from so many different disciplines, not just visual art, but there was also musicians in there and there was writers in there as well. And oh my God, I devoured it. I loved every single moment of this book. So the way that Olivia Laing has put this collection together is they have been sectioned off per discipline. So you'll have essays about painters, essays about writers, about musicians. And when I say I love learning about an artist's process, when I love the behind the scenes, I love that almost more than the actual artwork that when it's been finished. And I just feel like the depth of research that went into this, the beautiful writing on top of that, it was, oh my God, it was just so good. And it was just nice when an artist that I knew and liked appeared, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I really love hearing about them. And it wouldn't be boring. Like, even if I already knew quite a lot about their life and about their work and about their influence and about their practice, there was still something in there that absolutely kept me hooked. Some of my favorite essays would have been on, I love the Georgia O'Keeffe one. She is probably my all-time favorite painter. There's a really good essay on David Wojnarowicz as well. Agnes Martin, and do you know what? I just want to say they were all good. They were great. Georgia O'Keeffe one was brilliant for me because I just absolutely love her work. I think she's a total badass as well. But I would recommend this to anyone who loves non-fiction to do with art and artists. If you like a good essay collection, if you like Olivia Laing, then definitely read it. They're just so good at non-fiction. So good. Next up was a book that I felt was a bit of a disappointment. So I spoke about this a little bit in my previous video, but it was Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. And I wasn't really hooked by anything in it. I wasn't hooked by the characters. I wasn't hooked by the language. I wasn't hooked by the plot. I feel like there was a lot of hype and buzz around it, and I could see why. And it's not like it was terrible or bad or anything like that. It was still an enjoyable read. It was a romp. It was salacious. It was a bit scandalous, but I also felt like it was a bit superficial, maybe, like it was quite surface level, and maybe that was the point, but I felt myself just like wanting more. And yeah, it didn't feel like I didn't feel like I got the hook that I wanted from different components of the book. I will say that if you are drawn to this book, I think I said all of this in my previous video, but if you're drawn to this book because it's an older woman protagonist and you're like, yes, I don't want to read about 20-somethings in the city anymore, then I would steer you towards Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead rather than Vladimir. Like I said in my earlier video as well, I want it to be picked up and adapted for screen. I think that it would like translate really well to either a series or a film. Probably a series I think would work better for this. I would say that I wish some areas were explored more, but I don't think that was the point of the book at all. So I'm trying to not criticize it for what I wanted it to be rather than what it was, because for what it was, it's a really good book. Like, that's a book you could take on holiday and you could like zip through it and you'd be entertained. It's a book for entertainment purposes, I think, rather than a book for beautiful language or deep thinking. Then I read a book that was definitely for people who like good writing. It was Deborah Levy's Things I Don't Want to Know. Now, I don't have the nice cover of this that everybody else has. I just have this like random penguin cover of it. But this was so good. Like I said about Olivia Laing's Funny Weather, non-fiction that is about artists and their practice is my chosen drug. Like, give it to me. And this is definitely one of these books. So you learn a lot about Deborah Levy's childhood. You learn a lot about, sorry, there's so much beeping outside, about her home life. I honestly didn't know anything about her as a person or a writer. I just read quite a few of her books. I've read Hot Milk, The Unloved, Swimming Home, and I really like all of them. Actually, I don't ever really see people speaking about The Unloved. It's always Hot Milk or Swimming Home. But if you haven't read The Unloved, read it. It is so good. It is so good. But yeah, this was really a deep dive into her upbringing and her childhood. And if you haven't read it, I don't want really to say anything about it because I went into it not knowing anything about her personal life, and it was quite revelatory, and there is just so much good writing in here. Let's see if I can find anything that I have underlined. It seems that what interests me in my sheriff's notebook is the act of kissing in the middle of a political catastrophe. And yes, there was no such thing as a surreal emotion. Mother was the woman the whole world had imagined to death. The world loved the delusion more than it loved the mother. I knew that when I read the opening of this book that I was going to absolutely love it immediately. That spring when life was very hard and I was at war with my lot and simply couldn't see where there was to get to, I seemed to cry most on escalators at train stations. Going down them was fine, but there was something about standing still and being carried upwards that did it. From apparently nowhere, tears poured out of me, and by the time I got to the top and felt the wind rushing in, it took all my effort to stop myself from sobbing. It was as if the momentum of the escalator carrying me forwards and upwards was a physical expression of a conversation I was having with myself. Escalators, which in the early days of their invention were always known as travelling staircases or magic stairways, had mysteriously become danger zones. And I don't know whether that's just because I'm definitely someone who's cried in public multiple times. It just felt like you were, like, from that opening paragraph, like we were going to really get to know Deborah Levy as a person, and you can see that she's kind of questioning, like, why is this happening to me? And you know that she's going to question, like, where did this come from and why did it need to happen? And you definitely get that throughout the entire book. There's just so much good stuff in here. There's a line towards the end that just says, "It was very urgent that I got out of my life." And oh God, I underlined that a lot. Writing made me feel wiser than I actually was. Wise and sad. That was what I thought writers should be. When love goes wrong, instead of seeing the front of things, we saw the back of things. When love goes wrong, everything goes wrong. If you want good writing, pick up this book. Like, pick up this book. sometimes in life it's not about knowing where to start, it's about knowing where to stop. Like, I feel like there's just really good life advice just peppered all the way through this as well. When we kissed, I knew we were both in the middle of some sort of catastrophe, and I didn't know if something was starting or if it was stopping. Like, that kind of like hyperbolic writing that's really emotional, I am all there for that. Like, kissing, having crushes, crying on escalators, not knowing why. These are the things that I want a writer to examine, and Deborah Levy definitely did that. So up next was something that I struggled to really put into words how I felt about it. I had a lot of mixed thoughts about. It was Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson, and I'm just gonna say, like, I'm not a romance reader, I'm not a romance girl, even though I am a romantic and I love to romanticize everything. I do not read romance books. I find them quite drippy and soppy, and they don't really seem like real or raw to me, and it's just not really something that I've ever gravitated towards. And I didn't expect Open Water to fall into that category, but to my disappointment, it absolutely did. But I will say, whenever the story was not focused on the romance and the relationship, I absolutely loved it. I wish that this book had focused more on the narrator and his experience and his life, which it did, but I wish it was solely focused on that, because when that was happening, the writing was so emotional, and it honestly felt like such a privilege to be so deep inside the mind of someone. That's the only way I can really describe it. Like, you're really getting to know the emotional landscape of a young black man living in London who's an artist but has to, you know, help support his family, and is having a are we, aren't we relationship with someone. And it was just so beautifully written, apart from the romance bits, that I was really conflicted whilst reading it, because I knew that there was so much good in this, but I couldn't truly love it because the romance, it really was just quite drippy, and there were so many metaphors that just simply were not needed in in my opinion. Very early on, there's a metaphor which I was like, am I going to be able to get through this book? And I did, and I'm glad I did. But essentially he's saying, like, they are like a pair of tangled headphone wires that are caught together. And when I read that, I was like, oh dear, I don't know if we can carry on. But I'm glad I did, because then we got some sentences like, besides, sometimes to resolve desire is better to let the thing bloom, to feel this thing, to let it catch you unaware, to hold on to the ache. What is better than believing you're heading towards love? I love that, because it basically just sums up how invincible you feel when you have a crush. And that is the best feeling in the world, I think. Having a crush is like, oh, it's the best feeling. Something that I loved about this book was the amount of music references. So it was almost like you had a soundtrack going in your head as you read it, and I felt like that was a really intimate thing to add. It was very, you know, it added this like, you know, added more texture, added layers. It kind of drew you in a lot more. It made it more personal. But something that I really did not like about this was that it was written in the second person, and that is, to me, like, just not something I read often, so it was quite jarring, and I definitely prefer first person narration. Then we had an absolute stunner of a book, The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. I thought that this was incredible. Like, everybody read it now if you haven't already. And usually I absolutely hate when you pick up a book and it has the either film or series adaptation as the cover, but this one works so well. And a lot of the Elena Ferrante books have really funky covers that I wouldn't necessarily want to see on my shelf, but this works so good. I then watched the film adaptation that was on Netflix of this. It was directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, stars Olivia Colman and Dakota Johnson, and it was so good. Obviously there were some artistic license, where there were some changes made and it wasn't completely faithful to the book, but there was just, as with most of Ferrante's writing that I've read, there was like this dark undercurrent, there was tension that was building, it was like, you know, punching at the surface, trying to break through, and that was definitely evident in this book and in the film. I would say that I had a similar experience reading this when I read The Days of Abandonment. I read that last summer, and reading The Days of Abandonment, I felt physically ill. Like, the experience I had was so visceral reading it, because it was so consuming and there was so much chaos and so much rage and so much injustice, and just like, it was like coming off of the page and like going into my body, and I just felt like it was like making me ill. And I had quite a similar experience reading this book. It was just so affecting, and I love Ferrante's writing. It is next to none. She's incredible. This follows a writer who has taken herself off on a holiday. She's by herself. You kind of have these two timelines interweaving, and as they interweave and the book goes on, you see a kind of a full portrait of our protagonist and the decisions that she's made in life and why she's made them, and why that might make her feel guilty, it might make her feel ashamed, but really, as a society, like, we are the people that are, you know, pressuring others into making these decisions. And, you know, if someone's pressured into making a life choice that they don't want to, like, should we then really be questioning them and making them feel guilty for something that they didn't want to do in the beginning? There was just so much in here about the depiction of what a mother should look like, what a woman should look like, what a career should look like, what childcare should look like, what a family should look like. It really questioned so much, particularly about being a woman, a mother, and a wife, or, you know, just, I can tell I'm going to reread this book quite a lot. It was really something quite special. Then next I read Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee, and I picked this up because my boyfriend had read it and he said it was really good, and I kind of wanted something different. So I was like, yeah, like, why not? I'll read this book. And it was absolutely harrowing. It was so emotional. It is a very well-known book for a reason, absolutely. I feel like the writing is so straightforward because there is so much in the story. It is so heavy, and I don't even really know how to form words or thoughts on it coherently yet. But I would say that if you like to read an unlikable narrator, if you like your head to be challenged in that way, where your protagonist is someone that, you know, you can't back, you know, your protagonist is someone who you can't understand, then this is a good read for you, because it is so challenging to have to read from this man's perspective, and you don't agree with any of his thoughts, and you don't agree with any of his actions. And yeah, I would say content warning for a lot of things, so just be sensitive if you haven't read this book and you're thinking you might want to pick it up. I would be very, very sensitive to sexual assault, to racism, to animal cruelty, to just aggressive behavior and violence in general. There is a lot of all of that. It is set in South Africa, and it really speaks a lot to the divide that was created during apartheid and how that has echoed through time, and just the kind of knock-on effect that generations and generations and generations of racists and those who suffer racism have to go through. And yeah, it was a really powerful read. It took a lot. It was, you know, very heavy, but a very well written book for sure. Next up, back to my favourite genre, writers writing about writing. I read Elena Ferrante's In the Margins. So Elena Ferrante had been asked to give, what university was it by? Sorry, she'd been asked to deliver some lectures on writing for a university. In the editor's note at the beginning, it says, I would like to think that the autumn of 2020 would be the ideal time for Elena Ferrante to give 3 lectures at the University of Bologna on 3 successive days open to the entire city. These lectures would discuss her work as a writer, her poetics, her narrative technique, or anything else she wants, and would ideally be of interest to a broad, non-specialist audience. And I would say that that is exactly what this book is. So if you like reading about writing, if you're interested in writing, or if you just really like Elena Ferrante and you want to learn more about her and her background as an author, then this book is definitely for you. I would say it's quite accessible. I wouldn't say it's the most accessible thing I've read in terms of writers writing about writing. It can be quite technical at times, but that wasn't an issue for me, and I actually loved the way she wrote about her upbringing and how that influenced the way that she writes. I really enjoyed learning about her technique for creating her narrative voice and how she chooses to create her I within work, and also just finding her voice as a woman when she's only really revered literature that's been written by men, and how that struggle for her to find her voice as a woman and to create credible women in her work, which she absolutely does. We all know that. Yeah, I would say that this is amazing. One sentence that stuck with me and I am applying to everything in my life, and I think all artists absolutely should. At one point she says, we have to work with the bad writing, and like that's just an encouragement to, like, even if you've done something, say it's a painting, say it's a sequence of movements, say it is some writing, some sentences, like that is what you have to work with, and you have to keep working with it, and it will turn into something else. And I just thought it was such good practical advice, and there are lots of other little, you know, sprinkles of wisdom like that you can so easily apply to your life throughout here. This is now an Elena Ferrante fan club, so you're welcome. Next up, I read What a Shame by Abigail Bergstrom. I spoke about this in my previous video. I did this as an audiobook and would highly recommend. I'm not going to say too much on it because I already spoke about it, but if you're interested in reading a book on loss and grief and friendship and how to deal with these themes in life, especially as a millennial woman, then I would suggest reading What a Shame. Having kind of put a pause on reading books about 20-somethings in the city for a while, I was surprised to learn how much I actually enjoyed listening to this book. The whole performance of it as well was incredible. So if you're looking for an audiobook, I would definitely suggest this because the narrator was spot on, so good. It made me laugh, it made me get quite tearful. You know, it did make me think about a lot of family issues and relationships and how we view other people's loss and how we deal with other people who are grieving, and, you know, how you deal with it yourself. I would be sensitive going in, and there's definitely a lot to do with, like I said, loss and grief. So just be sensitive to the content and how you're feeling if you pick that up, but I would definitely recommend it. Then we had a Cusk moment. I read Outline by Rachel Cusk and questioned why I'd never read it before now. It was incredible. The book is made up of about, I think it's 10 conversations, and the way that Cusk reveals each character and her protagonist to us through conversation is so masterful. It is so good. I don't even know how to put into words the way that I felt about the writing in this, but we all love Cusk here, and we all know it's good. I'm probably the last person to ever read this book. I think everybody else has read it by now. There's just something about her writing. She could literally write about anything and I would be there for it. There was recently a piece of her writing published on Granta, and it was about marble, and I read it and was like, yes, I I love learning about marble. This is amazing. And I just feel like Cusk really does have the ability to write about anything and make it engaging and introspective and revealing at the same time. And oh my God, she really is a genius, isn't she? Then I read Antigone, and I gave you the whole rundown of that on my previous video. I think I spent probably over 10 minutes giving you a brief synopsis. Greek tragedy by Sophocles. If you are interested in reading about badass women who challenge the status quo, if you want to read about the individual versus the state, or the love of family versus the love of the state, then I would highly suggest it. It's a very good play. It's stuck around for all of these years for a reason. And off the back of that, I read The Island by Athol Fugard, John Canny, and Winston Nshona. And it was such an interesting play to it was also a play. It was very interesting to read right after reading Antigone. This play follows two men who are imprisoned in Robben Island prison. It's set during the apartheid era, and it really does so much with so little. There's two characters, and how much is generated just by the interaction between them is amazing. It's amazing. If you've read Antigone and you liked it, I would suggest reading this. The two prisoners, they stage a performance of Antigone, which is, you know, a very highly political choice, because the play is about an individual challenging the state, and so to do that as a prisoner inside a prison is a very bold statement. A lot of it is drawn from real life, and I think that if you read this, doing some research round about it will make you appreciate it so much more, because trying to have work approved, like art approved during apartheid, was obviously very difficult, and for this play to be written and performed was really quite a feat and a big challenge. In regards to the realism of the play, it's just deeply upsetting to learn the ins and out of the prisoners' daily life there, and how difficult it was, and then how their brotherhood got them through that. And they would play this game where they would pretend to be on the phone to people back home and make up these scenarios, and just little things like that. And the distinct realism that came through was just really powerful. It was definitely out of my usual comfort zone of reading, but I really enjoyed it and would definitely recommend it. And then I also read Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson. This book has some of the most gorgeous writing I have ever read in my entire life, and believe I probably ever will read. So this book follows a love affair. We have our protagonist who falls in love with a married woman, and I think this book really speaks to how desire affects our life, our choices, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about others, and how we view our lives and our bodies and those we interact with, and just how powerful desire can be in general. There is a part of the book that I absolutely loved. It's called The Special Senses. It's little passages about the senses, and you know, like the ears and sound, and the nose and smelling and taste. And the passage about taste is one of my favorite passages I've ever read. In this passage, the protagonist is writing about her lover being an olive, and it is so beautiful and so sexy. But yeah, this book is now fully treasured by me, and it's just really about desire and the consequences of desire, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad, but they definitely imprint on you, and they like leave a lasting impression. And I mean, look how closely I'm holding this book. I love this book. You should read this book if you haven't read it already, and please look at how gorgeous that cover is. Like, if you think this is beautiful, like that is what you're getting when you read the book. Yeah. To lose someone you love is to alter your life forever. You don't get over it because it is the person you loved. The pain stops, there are new people, but the gap never closes. How could it? I read this very quickly because I definitely felt like I just could not get enough. It's the sunset time of year, but it's not the dropping disc of light that holds me in the shadows of the yard. It's the colour I crave, floodings of you running down the edges of the sky, onto the brown earth, onto the grey stone, onto me. The imagery in this is powerful, and just really lyrical sentences interspersed between hyper-realism as well, and a lot of emotion, and just a really authentic protagonist as well, like someone who doesn't make all the correct choices but has so many thoughts and questioning what is selfish, what is selfless. Like, should you always do what is right and moral, or should you sometimes choose what you want in life, even if it's selfish, even if that affects other people? Like, is that something that you should be going after? Desire is a subject that I love to read about, and this book did it so well, so well. And that is everything I read over, I think it was March, April and May. Yeah, March, April, May, that's everything I read. It wasn't a lot, but there were some really, really good ones in there. Yeah, it's now fully summer. We are in like past mid-June, so hopefully I have the time for, you know, reading to pick up a little bit more. I'm currently reading The White Book by Han Kang, and really, really, really enjoying it. So I've kind of lately been reading a lot of like memoir and poetry and just things that aren't necessarily like a story. Like, I haven't really been reading like a solid novel. Things I've been reading lately, a lot of them are very like fragmented and just like not straightforward memoir and not straightforward poetry, just like a mix of things. And it's been quite enjoyable, but I do feel that craving for like a good novel coming up, so we'll have to see which one I pick. I hope you're reading something good at the moment. I'd love to hear, as usual, what you have been reading, whether you've loved it, whether it's been a disappointment, what you're planning on reading next, anything you'd like to recommend to me. I'm always open for recommendations. And yeah, thank you so much for watching.